where Shelton comes for news and talk. The Lisa Wexler Show, now on Southern Connecticut's news and information leader, WICC 600.
Joining us right now, been very, very patient, is Diane, Cece of the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. We're going to talk now about a proposed 77-unit big deal complex right at the heart of the entry of East Norwalk. Hello, Diane, Cece, and welcome back to the Lisa Wexler Show.
Good morning, Lisa. I haven't been on the show in a while, and there's, I think I've said this to you before, I could probably call in every week with very interesting happenings regarding land use and government processes and lack of engagement, but I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk about this one. And before I say that, I just want to say I agree with the prior caller. I think your analysis is extremely helpful to listeners. And I know sometimes you think you're getting in the weeds, but sometimes you have to get in the weeds just to provide the context so people can understand the analysis that you're looking at and you're sharing with us. So I wouldn't worry about that. I find it very helpful.
Thank you.
When you really do it, a deep dive into that stuff, and always fascinated when you put on your legal hat. I'm just glued to it, and I'm sometimes ignoring my work. So
okay. Well, that's my goal.
You have to write a note to please excuse Diane because I'm on a legal tirade, and I'm.
That's my goal, Diane. I want you completely distracted from work, totally focused on WICC.
I'm buying Powerball tickets, so that will free me up.
Oh, listen, what do they say? You never know, and you can't win if you play.
Exactly, and $1 and a dream. But anyway, so thanks for having me on, and
sure.
Just with that intro of and we'll say another 77 units because this is. This is an issue all around Norwalk and really all around Fairfield County.
Yes.
But what's happening in East Norwalk proper, not unlike South Norwalk and up by Merritt 7 and Glover Avenue and in other communities.
I think we should call that the North 7 City.
Yes. Yeah, and city's a good word.
Yes. It's the North 7 City. I mean, they're building a city. They're building a city.
There's 1,300 units, all kinds of services there. And you're right, it would be something like a city, but what it's going to do, as an impact to the city, I guess remains to be seen. I think it's disingenuous for folks like zoning commissioners who are supposed to, have the best interests of both applicants and the public at heart to compare these things to existing office buildings. I think that's kind of ridiculous, in terms of the height and scale and density. But anyway, be that as it may, you can see where this is coming from. And a lot of it goes back to what you and I have been talking about for the past few years, which is transit-oriented development.
Yeah.
And that's really a major push coming down from Hartford that suggests that the state really needs to increase population, build more apartments in the hopes that would then, in their minds, create additional affordable housing. And that's not always the case, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And so what they have this mandate to implement transit-oriented development around commuter rail trains and rail stations with the premise that people who are commuting don't necessarily need cars, and you want them to have the highest density closest to transportation hubs, right? So on the surface, that sounds like, kind of smart development. Where the issue comes in is that you have too much density and scale being developed. And this is what's happened in East Norwalk. So the latest application, or the one that has just been filed now in the past 2 weeks, is for the 77 units, kind of in the center of the village of East Norwalk.
Yeah, right there.
That you come through from virtually every gateway into East Norwalk.
Yeah.
And while it is kind of a diamond in the rough where, can use some beautification, some updating to amenities and retail and things like that, we certainly don't consider it the type of TOD scale where we want 1,000 apartments to be surrounding the train station. And what we have now is a development that's literally not just the 77 units on a 1.6 acres.
Yeah, it's incredible. Only 1.6 acres.
1.6 acres. 77 units is just incredible.
Wow.
And it does replace, or it's going to replace, the bank there that he owns.
Uh-huh.
In the interest of fairness, Lisa, none of us agree that having that bank sitting in the middle of an asphalt jungle there with an unused parking lot is smart for that parcel.
Okay.
Because you don't want that kind of heat, you don't want that kind of runoff, it's not used, etc. But I think what's happened here is it's gone to the other extreme to say that the bank will come out, but now we're going to pack in as many units as we can. So people will ask me, how can this be? How can this be happening? How can we fight this? And one of the most important takeaways, I think, for you and for your audience is, in this particular case, that ship has sailed already. How can they use this for apartments, and how can this be as big as it is? That ship sailed when the city of Norwalk passed through zoning regulations that changed the East Norwalk corridor here into what's called the East Avenue Village Transit Zone. And that's the one, as you recall, the past 2 years, we fought like heck, Lisa. I'm sure you recall this.
I do.
And in the end, we not only couldn't kill this zone, but we really couldn't even make any significant enough changes to it to mitigate the density and scale of what the potential units are going to be.
Wow.
And knowing all along that this was likely going to be the first of many properties to actually see an application, the owner of the property was just waiting in the wings for the zone change to come through, and then literally within a couple of months had all the plans ready and then just filed at this point.
Wow.
So the regulations now, and this is why we're trying to educate people on, you can't go back now and say they can't do this. The issue now is how to mitigate how much of this they can do. Because the fact is, if this application meets the zoning requirements for both the scale, meaning the size, and the density, meaning the number of units, then there is nothing within the power of the zoning commission, essentially, to deny it. They won't have the legal right to deny it, even though it's a special permit. And I can go into that in detail. So we really, we tried to educate the public to say, if we can't stop this TOD zone from being approved the way it is, then once it gets to be special permits being filed, our hands are really tied. And I think a lot of people bought into the party line from City Hall that says, well, each one of these major developments has to be filed as a special permit. And I know you know what those are, but for your listeners, a special permit has 13 different criteria, standards, that it has to be measured against, that other permit types don't have to do. But most importantly, a special permit requires that there be at least one public hearing. So in essence, you would think that those are two major components that actually protect the community and give them the right to analyze things that normally wouldn't be analyzed on a regular permit, but more importantly, make sure we kind of have our, I'll say day in court, for lack of a better term, by having a public hearing. And so what's the problem with that, Lisa? The problem is that by the time these applications get to public hearing, it's a done deal. All of the work and all of the approvals and all of the dotting the I's and crossing the T's has really been done behind closed doors with staff and then pre-reviewed, like with the zoning commissioner. And there's very little that can be changed at that time. And in fact, you'll sometimes see very controversial applications where the zoning and planning commission actually votes on the actual, they vote on the item the same night as the public hearing, which means they're not even going away and researching anything that the public told them, checking facts and data.
Diane, we're chatting with Diane Cece. Can you stay? I need to listen to some commercials, and we'll be right back. We're chatting with Diane Cece of East Norwalk. We're talking about a proposed 77-unit development in East Norwalk, but with general applicability to a lot of the zoning laws that are being passed in our local community. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Here's what Connecticut is saying about Lisa Wexler.
I just love the moderation of the way you handle the calls.
Back to the Lisa Wexler Show on WICC 600.
And welcome back to the show. Diane, Cece rejoins us. We're talking a little bit about the proposed 77 units. So, Diane, with the barn, having left the barn door open or whatever the heck it is, the fact, well, what is it that now the P&Z commissioner is saying that he wants a consultant? In other words, what can the people do? Can you insist on better landscaping? Can you insist on prettier shutters? I'm looking at the architectural rendering. It's very, let me put it this way. It could be definitely enhanced.
Right. Yeah, and so in terms of what can be done now, I mean, there is still some, supposedly there's still some input into the actual number of units, the layout of the buildings, some of the architectural design. We were promised by the developer that this would be very nautical, maritime.
There's nothing nautical in maritime. I'm looking at it. There's nothing here nautical. I'm looking at it.
No, absolutely not. And the word he always used was Nantucket. And though I've never been there, I had this, and many of us had this conjured up idea of what Nantucket, New England kind of maritime would look like.
Yeah,
this resembles nothing like it. I'm so glad that you agree with us on that.
Yeah,
in fact, it's interesting because their architect in their presentation to the Planning and Zoning Commission actually identified this as being great architecture that ties in with the Norwalk Green. Which he was boasting on. And the Norwalk Green, as you know, is basically, 2 miles away, and a completely different architecture and character of the neighborhood than East Norwalk, which is entirely...
I don't even think the Norwalk Green has a consistent architecture. On one side, it has some old, lovely buildings, and on the other side, it has some commercial buildings that have no place being put there, but were there, 30 years ago.
Right, exactly.
Doesn't really have much.
Some of the older buildings, they do have kind of the New England...
The older ones.
Village green, right.
Yeah,
and then
the older ones.
Right,
yeah.
And pays homage, I think, to some of the church structures, but it's certainly nothing like we were led to believe. But so an important part when you say what can we do here, by filing this application, and I want you to know it was filed with no notice to ENNA, despite the fact that we were promised to have that, Lisa, so that we could provide input on the very things you just mentioned before the application is filed. So you might say, well, what's the big deal? You can talk to them now. And in fact, we're negotiating how we're going to do that. Here's the big deal, and you'll appreciate this from a legal point of view. Once they file the application and it's no longer in draft review with just city staff, that filing starts off a regulatory statutory time clock, for lack of a better word. It literally starts off a clock that's in the favor of the applicants and completely against the residents. And it states that from the time that application goes in to the time that a public hearing is held must be 65 days, which is not a whole lot of time.
No,
when you consider all of the analysis that has to be done regarding traffic, environmental impact, the impact on the pond. Oh, I forgot to mention this to you. So you know that the parcel is, we call it Mill Pond, but it literally sits on Mill Pond, which is a waterway that leads into the river and the harbor, is just plentiful with waterfowl now that has redeveloped over the years for egrets and cranes and all kinds of ducks and things that we don't want to disturb with this size development. But what happened now is two things. So now they've started the clock without any notice to us, so we have very little time to, even if we had the money to hire experts, the clock is ticking. But you may recall back at the beginning of the year, the Director of Planning and Zoning, Steve Kleppen, combined our Planning and Zoning commissions. In Norwalk, they were two separate commissions appointed.
Yes.
And very often major developments then had to have two reviews, two public hearings, et cetera. And he combined them in the interest of developers to cut down on their time and their expenses. So now we don't get the benefit of having a planning commission review it from a long-term planning point of view and compliance with the master plan, and then the zoning commission to review it separately with a public hearing, regarding the actual, structure, landscaping, lighting, et cetera. And Lisa, they did this so that they could expedite the mandatory hiring of the consultants you just mentioned. In this zone, they're required to have a design third-party peer review, and then in most cases a third-party peer review on the traffic study. So this is why they rushed this thing through, so that they could get the approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission to hire those consultants to start the process. Well, guess what? They're looking to do that to hasten it through. And as of this morning, right before I logged on with you, there is still no traffic study that's been presented by the applicants.
So Diane, yes. So Diane, we are, we always are coming up on time here on live radio. Can you just tell people who want to align with you or follow what you're doing or be part of what you're doing, how to reach you and what they should be monitoring and what they should be doing?
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that. So as kind of a funneling of information group, the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association maintains an email list and also social media presence. And we really encourage people to get on our email list because that's where we get information out fastest and, get all the facts and data. And we'll be providing our commentary and analysis there, recommending what people should be concerned about or asking for. For signing up or going to our website, it's eastnorwalk.org, www.eastnorwalk.org. They can also find us on Facebook and Instagram and nextdoor.com, and they can always email us at info@eastnorwalk.org.
Do you have a Facebook group?
We have a Facebook page. East Norwalk, eastnorwalk.org.
I'll follow that.
If they Google East Norwalk Neighborhood
That's
Association, good. If they search on East Norwalk Neighborhood Association in Facebook, our page will pop up.
All right, I'll follow that too if I'm not already on it.
And we'll be trying to update that. We're all volunteers, as you know, in a small board. So sometimes the fastest information we get out is email and then follow up with social media. But we really encourage people, especially in East Norwalk, to follow this, get involved, ask lots of questions. We'll provide a toolkit for how they can get involved for emails, petitions, etc. But this has also raised a lot of interest in the broader Norwalk community, too. So we're hoping people will speak up and share their concerns and questions and suggestions as well.
Thank you, Diane. Diane Cece on the Lisa Wexler Show. Thank you. Thank you.